Hey Shell Point, thank you for joining me again today for this Academy session. We're excited to have Professor Kerr present to us again this semester. This session is Thailand History and Culture, Part 1. Professor Kerr, take it away.
Hello Shell Point. This is us continuing our presentations but in an online mode, and I'm going to give a two-part talk on the history and the culture of Thailand. So off we go. This is the rough area that you think of when you think of Southeast Asia. So right in the middle here we have Thailand, and then its neighbors, of course, in the west is Burma, or Myanmar as it's called these days, and then in the north is Laos, and then to the southeast of Cambodia. And as you see from this presentation as we move through it, that these other countries have had a very big impact on the formation and the size and the structure of Thailand in the center. The two big cities in Thailand, as you know, in the south is the capital Bangkok, which is a newish city, as you'll explain later, and then the beautiful city of Chiang Mai in the northern part of Thailand. The beginning of historical evidence of mankind in Thailand goes back to around about 1 million years ago when stone tools were found in the northwest of Thailand. And then in the northeast, about 500,000 years later, we started to see some more developments, but very slow compared to the Middle East. And then we start to see the first signs of artwork in the period of about 9000 BC, the so-called Spirit Cave in the northwest near Chiang Mai. And this is a picture I took of the drawings that were done. It's called Spirit Cave because it looks like some sort of hunting scene with humans, stick humans on the right-hand side. There's also indications of cereal, and the beginnings of pottery are found in the cave. Life takes us leap forward around about 2500 BC, and we start to see a more structured civilization in Thailand. We see graves with grave goods, typically bronze items, spears, axes, crucibles, etc. Rice cultivation is now underway, having come in from China, and domestic animals are being husbanded. If you think about what was going on in the rest of the world at 2500 BC, that's when the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. So I'm afraid the Thais are well behind the Middle East and Egypt particularly. But things are moving quickly, and by 2000 BC, we find that in the plains of Thailand, the beginnings of these artifacts. This is a water buffalo, and it's found in the northeast of Bangkok. And then later, about 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid was built, we start to see river cultures appearing, the population is increasing. We have little villages and towns which are protected by walls, ditches, and ramparts, and moats. And we look to its big brother China next door for the first signs of historical information on this new country. And the Chinese report that they are trading with the Thai folk, and they're also trading with Indian people who've come over from the subcontinent. And so they mention that Thailand are separate from the rest of Southeast Asia and Malaysia, around about 100 AD, which is sort of the peak of the Roman Empire. The Thai people are being recognized in the Southeast Asia area. The first civilization which pretends to be an empire is called Funan, and this picture shows you the top right-hand corner there, a very large geographical spread which goes over from Malaysia through Thailand south and then into Cambodia and over as far as Vietnam. Now this is not an empire in the sense of the Roman Empire, which it had the same time period. It's more of a group of city-states like the Greek city-states of the 500 BC period onwards. They were an Indianization empire. So their language, their script, and their religion all came from India. And the Indian, Funan, Cham people are all based on the great Indian gods, and we'll see some of those later on. Sanskrit was the written form of the language, and these people in Funan are now big enough and trading widely so that the people in Rome refer to them, and even the Persians are trading with them. They, of course, have to pay tribute to the big country in the neighborhood, which is China. But the Chinese, in their annals, report a very interesting feature that in the city of Nanjing, near to Shanghai, the people of Funan were well known for music. and a Funan music school was set up in Chinese Nanjing at the time of around about 200 or 300 AD. They had a navy, and they sent ambassadors to India to trade goods. They fought with their neighbors, in this case the Viet people, around about 270 AD. But by the 4th century AD, they were well and truly under the thumb of their big neighbors, the Han dynasty in China. And we start to see in some of these areas of Funan the gods that they worshipped. This is the god Vishnu, who came directly, of course, from northern India. The religion of Southeast Asia is dominated by Buddhism, and I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how that grew out of the Ganges plain to dominate Southeast Asian religion today. If you cast your mind back to around about 500 BC, the population of the world had risen to about 100 million. We were getting more populous, we were having cities, we were specializing in teachers and universities, and so we began to create time to think about the meaning of life. In China, we had two great thinkers, in Confucius and the Taoism concept. In the Holy Land, the Old Testament prophets were writing about religion. The Greek philosophers were very busy at this time, and in Persia, the religion of Zoroaster was alive and well and dominated Persia for the next few hundred years. So all around the world, people are questioning the meaning of life and the existing religion that they have. India was going back 1,500 years in terms of its religion. We call it Hinduism today, but technically it's called Brahmanism. And of course, Brahmanism goes back to around about 2000 BC and is based on a caste system, formal rituals, dates and timing. The number of festivals in India too are numerous. Holy locations are important, the Ganges plain, Mother Ganges. And Brahmanism is a very structured, ancient religion which doesn't fit all of the people of the new Southeast Asia or even India itself. So out of this comes a free-thinking prince. His name is Siddhartha Gautama, and he's nicknamed by us as the Enlightened One in the language of Buddha. We think he was alive between the period of 560 to 480, but we don't have very specific dates. He was born in the Nepal-India foothills, and he was a prince of royal blood. And he's recently married at the age of 29, was about to take over the kingdom when he decided he would walk down from his great palace down to the town, and he'd look and see what his people looked like. And there he was absolutely astonished. There was drought, there was suffering, there were people suffering from diseases, people very hungry, and poverty was everywhere. And he was astonished and shocked. And he said, how can I be a royal prince and run my country from my palace when all my people are in disarray? And he began to question what was the right way to address this inequality between the rich and the poor. So he decided to go on an expedition of enlightenment, and he spent 6 years seeking wisdom. In those days, if you were a transient religious holy man, it's very common to let your hair grow, you wore simple clothing, and the concept in those days, and to still some extent in India, but less and less, is that if you punished yourself physically, then your spirit would actually reach the point of enlightenment. And so he starved himself to death. He told to his disciples later that my bones and my spine stood out like spindles. He was on death's door, and he laid down to die, covered in his clothes and rags, when a young girl came out from her house and sat down in the street, and she started to eat her daily meal, which was a rice pudding, and she noticed the rags that were beside her actually moved. She pulled back the rags, and there was a very thin, emaciated Buddha. And so she offered him her dinner, and he decided maybe it's not such a good idea to die so painfully without reaching enlightenment. Is there a middle way? So she saved his life, and Sujata is a very important person in the story of Buddha. He then went to what is now Patna, a place called Bodh Gaya. He's now 35 years of age, and he sits underneath a fig tree for 49 days and 49 nights, trying to understand what is the best way to conduct yourself, not only himself but also humanity, to reach the important thing, which is enlightenment. And he came up with 4 concepts, which are the foundation of Buddhism. First of all, the world is full of suffering. Secondly, the suffering is caused by ignorance, and that ignorance is based on the false desire for possessions. So he said, the first thing I have to do, and everybody has to do if they want to reach enlightenment truly, is to renounce these negative desires of creation of wealth, which is why I often say, the concept of capitalism, and particularly in the United States, never fits very well with Buddhism. So it's unlikely that Buddhism will sweep through modern United States because they're so differently focused. He wrote out mentally the things that actually made you prepare yourself for enlightenment, and those listed here, the 8 items, would be common to almost all religions in the world. They're not something that you'd debate and question. They make a lot of sense. But he wanted to share these 8 with his people, who of course couldn't read or write. So he made them into the wheel of Dharma, where every spoke of this wheel was represented some of the things that you should do to achieve wisdom, how to conduct yourself, and how to develop your mind. And that's the famous Wheel of Dharma, which you'll see as a focal point and a symbol of Buddhism. A new religious leader is not always welcome, as we know from Christianity. And there were many people who felt he was a fraud, and he was trying to steal, if you like, people from other religions to his new religion. In fact, I should correct that. It's not a religion, Buddhism, it's a philosophy, because it has no gods. But the Hindus were very jealous of his growing influence, and so they challenged him, and the local king said, "Can you please show us that you have some powers that would influence us to believe that your way to enlightenment is the correct way?" And he had always made fun of miracle workers, but on this occasion he knew that if he was going to be successful in India, he'd have to persuade the rulers and the nobles and the rest of the Brahmin priests that he was genuine. So he conducted 2 miracles. And if you imagine sitting in this palatial room filled with nobles and religious people waiting for him to collapse, he conducted the 2 miracles which are famous. They're called the Savrasti miracles. Initially, he rose off the ground on 2 pillars of water. He hovered in the air, balanced on 2 pillars of water. And the second miracle was he then had flames rising out of his shoulders. So very impressive to anybody today. If you went into a room and you saw somebody rise up on pillars of water with flames come out their shoulders, I think you'd be impressed. And of course, he then was asked questions of what kind of philosophy, religion did he believe in. And he said that, don't worship me. You can achieve enlightenment on your own. He called it nirvana, and everyone can have their own Buddha. And so, in fact, there are millions of Buddhas. It just means the enlightened one. It's just that we give the name Buddha to him particularly. Well, he's getting old. He reaches 80, and he's commonly called the Sage of Shakya, which is the prince name he had, which was the head of the Shakyamuni clan. He's getting old and sick, and he knows he's close to death. So he decides to make his way back home after being away for over 30 years. And he's preparing to die and enter nirvana. So he heads back to Lumbini, where his family haven't seen him since he was 29, and he asks his followers to stay behind because he's preparing to die. And he said, the 5 of you disciples had followed him, may come with me. But he never made it to Lumbini, and he was very sick and weak, and he laid down in a small, scruffy village, which has become famous, a place called Kushnagar, a great place of pilgrimage today. And around about 480 BC, in this scruffy village, he laid down to die. And of course, his disciples said, why are you going to do it here? Why not go to a major city where people will build shrines to you and temples? And he said, nope, this is just fine. Small place is fitting. And he's just prepared to enter nirvana. And as he died, he turned to his disciples and said, let truth be your light, all created things must pass, strive for your own liberation diligently. Now, we don't know he actually said that, but many tens of years later, these were written down by his disciples. Sadly, not much to survive of that period when he was active. This is thought to be the oldest surviving shrine from that period, dating to perhaps 450 BC, where he's entering nirvana. And so it is that he dies. His philosophy or religion was a complete and utter failure. Nobody took it up. Hinduism continued, and it would never have been referred to in modern times had it not been for one great Indian king. The guy's name is Ashoka the Great. And 200 years later, he was battling away, and he just won the battle in Kalinga, which is now Orissa, and 100,000 of his enemy were lying dead on the battlefield. And he visited the battlefield the next morning, and he was horrified at the death that he had dealt out to his enemies. And he knew this wasn't the way to conduct his business of running India. He rejected the old Brahminist Vedic religion, and he met a Buddhist monk, and the Buddhist monk says, you know there's a different way to run your country than simply slaughtering and inflicting pain. And so he converted to Buddhism. And in the next 30 years of his rule, he converted the old-style way of running countries to a new one based on social order, where the rule of dharma replaces the rule of force. He built 8,000 brick stupas, which were supposed to represent the upside-down begging bowl. And when his disciples said to him, "What are we going to worship when you're dead?" He said, "Well, don't worship me. I'm not a god. The gods are not important. Where we came from is not important. Just focus on enlightenment." So they said, "We have to have something to represent you." So he picked up angrily his begging bowl, turned it upside down, slammed it on the table and said, "If you have to worship something, worship this shape," which is the circular shape of all of the Buddhist stupas, as they're called. And this is one of the most famous and well-restored one near Bhopal. And if you look carefully, the soul of the Buddha escapes through the top vent. And in fact, if you've been to Japan, you'll notice that the gateway is very common to the Shinto temples in Japan. And Shintoism is a Japanese form of Buddhism. The religion, as I said, was completely unsuccessful until it was picked up by Ashoka, and the whole of India then became Buddhist, and that applied to Sri Lanka in the south, and eventually it spread up into Tibet, and then into China, and of course into Thailand and Burma and Vietnam and further east. And so that's how Buddhism came to spread to Southeast Asia. After 200 years of Buddhist rule in India, things began to change. Around about 1000 AD, Brahmanism had a huge resurgence because they focused on the main gods, the four main gods of India, and they also had an Indian Bible. And that meant that many people could focus on this new revitalized Brahmanism. And so it was that in time, the religion that had ruled India for hundreds of years went away, and today it's a very, very small supported religion in India, but Sri Lanka is still a Buddhist island in the south. The positives of Buddhism were that there were no castes, so poor people could take advantage of that. There were no priests. You made enlightenment through your own thinking. The negatives, and this is where Brahmanism came resurging back, was there are no gods. And India is a land of 1 million gods, and people need gods to believe in. And furthermore, there's no heaven, and there's no interest in who created us and why we're here. So Buddhism is a very testing philosophy, and that's why it hasn't swept the world. Today, Christianity is the biggest religion, as you know. Over 2 billion people are Christians. Islam is next. Hinduism very close behind that. Very soon, Hinduism will exceed Islam. Buddhism is actually a lot bigger than this slide suggests. Although notionally it's 500 million, there's probably another 500 million people in China who are only now beginning to be accepted as Buddhists. So in fact, Buddhism could one day be one of the 4 big religions across the world. The Jains, who are parallel to the Buddhists, are tiny. They never took off. There's only 10 million of those in the western part of India. So if you look at where Buddhism is today, and this is why I'm mentioning it, it's really focused on the Southeast Asian countries plus China. And the biggest country by far, which is focused on Buddhism, is Thailand. 95% of the people of Thailand are active Buddhists. That's followed by Cambodia, and then right behind that is Myanmar. And so their whole lives are focused on Buddhism, practicing Buddhism, and the temples. Moving back to the history of Thailand, around about the time up to the period of the William the Conqueror in the west, the Mon people established a state, city-states in the western part of Bangkok. And that is generally considered to be the oldest city. Bangkok is a new city, as I mentioned. It's an 1800 city. And in this city of Nakhon Pathom are the 3 great religions, and Hinduism, Buddhism are side by side, using Sanskrit as the language. The Romans traded extensively with the Mon people. The Chinese got their tribute, of course, and the Mon Wheel of Law, which is shown in this picture, is in fact, of course, a simplified version of Buddha's Wheel of Dharma. And so now we start to see in Thailand this growth in the number of reclining Buddhas, and this is reputed to be the eldest, going back as far as 700 AD, but to be quite honest, every town in Thailand, the guides will take you to the oldest reclining Buddha in Thailand, so there are many of these. The Mon civilization fades and collapses, and it's now under great pressure, as this map shows, from the people in the east, the growing Angkor Empire based, we would call them the Khmer Empire, and they began to raid Thailand and push it back the boundaries. The Mon kingdom in the north is still surviving, and the southern Buddhist country, Lavo, in the south is our focus of attention. The Thailand border is very curious. If you look down the point where it meets Malaysia in yellow, it's a very peculiar manufactured border, and it was really driven by the Chinese, who didn't want the Thai people to push further into Malaya because this was their trading base. The southern civilization grew and prospered and had a capital in Lopburi, and all that's left of Lopburi is a few monkeys, as you can see, and some prangs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. This is a standard Buddhist structure in Southeast Asia. These are not Thai people. The Thai people have not yet arrived. The big power in the land at this time, of course, are the Cambodians, and Suryavarman I threatened the borders of Lavo. The Burmese raided over 30 years, and that's why the people of the Mon civilization of Lavo moved steadily away from Cambodia and from Burma, and they headed constantly southwards. The Mongols moved in and destroyed Burma around about 13th century, and as you can see, Puro Lavo was gobbled up by the growing Khmer Empire. At this time, Thailand, we call it today, was known as Siam. The Khmer Cambodian people called it Siam, and so did the Chinese. Now we start to see the Thai people arriving. The Thai themselves believe that their ancestors came from southern China. When the Emperor Gaozu founded the Tang Empire around about 600 AD, he pushed ever southwards, gobbling up more and more territory, and so the people in that territory had the choice of becoming Chinese or moving out, and the Thais moved out, and they went initially to the Chinese-Vietnam border, and then they pushed on to Laos, and then they pushed on into this area in the middle map, which is the very fertile group of rivers in Thailand, which forms the backbone then and still the backbone today of agriculture in Thailand. As you can see, Thailand is a land which is totally dominated by this Chao Phraya set of tributaries running down from north to south, and that's the fundamental grain basket, if you like, in this case rice, which made Thailand successful. The first reference to these newcomers was in fact their enemies. The Khmer had captured them and had put them to work in their armies, and the first manifestation of Thai people is 1145 AD, where they're shown as the vanguard of the Khmer army as they marched into battle against the Viet people. That's very, very late. So the 12th century is when the Thais were established. So we say that this is when Thai history started, and the very first proper Thai city-state was Sukhothai, which is shown here in the middle, this purple splodge north of Lopburi, and that is where the real Thailand grew up. It dominated the Central Plains rice culture. It was a very interesting culture because it was one of those almost semi-democratic arrangements where the king would not force you into his army, he wouldn't force you to necessarily pay severe taxes every year, but he did expect you to come and support the country when it was being attacked by other people. And you could always go and knock on the door of the king and approach him if there was an injustice to be solved, very much like the Majlis system in the Arab countries. The language, of course, was borrowed from the Indian language, Sanskrit, and so you start to see this rather loopy, circular type of lettering, which is specific to Thai. Buddhism, of course, was adopted, but it didn't last very long, less than 100 years, and the ruins of Sukhothai are almost ignored these days. This is a very grainy picture I took a long time ago, not on the tourist route. It's too far north and not in great condition. As you can see, this is a fisheye view of the ruined stupas in what's left of Sukhothai today. The next great kingdom in Thai history is the one which is internationally known and has tremendous buildings to visit to this day, and is a great place to visit as a tourist. It's called Ayutthaya, and that is the southern part of Thailand, which is shown here in the deep blue. And the founder of Ayutthaya was the King Rama Thibodi. And again, he used the concept of the Greek city-states. He welcomed all foreigners. So here we have in the early days of Thailand, Chinese are welcome, Viet people are welcome, and Indian Hindu are welcome. The only people that weren't welcome in his kingdom were the Islamic folk, and he destroyed many mosques to build the temples of Ayutthaya. He had a mandala system, which is an Indian concept where when you're needed, you come and fight for the king. He was so strong that he was able to attack the declining Khmer Empire in Cambodia, and he sacked their capital, Angkor. But again, he could not push any further south. The Chinese Ming dynasty this time were determined to keep Malaysia for themselves. This great kingdom was under huge threat from the resurgent Burmese people, and this is the largest geographical empire ever in Southeast Asia. It's called the Taungoo Kingdom after the dynasty. And the Burmese were very jealous of the Thais and were determined to take over their country, and they moved their capital to the border to a town called Pegu, ready for the invasion. And their king assembled the largest empire and army at that time, and they raided Thailand. And in doing so, they captured the king and most of the royal family and took them off to captivity to make sure that the Thais would behave and pay taxes. Burma eventually was strong enough to capture Ayutthaya itself in 1569, but there was a hero about to emerge which was going to push the Burmese back and make Ayutthaya even stronger. And his name was Naresuan, and he is a hero of Thailand today. He's the most revered king. And he fought back the Burmese. There was a famous battle between him on his royal elephant and the Burmese crown prince on his royal elephant, and the Burmese king was killed. And so King Naresuan pushed the Burmese out of Thailand, and that day, 8th of January 1593, is now recognized every year as National Armed Forces Day. Ayutthaya is independent again, so much so that Naresuan now goes in offensive and captures the capital of Burma, Pegu, but it's too far, the supply lines are too difficult, and he backs off and goes back to the old territory. And when he died in 1605, he's still referred to as the founder of ancient Thailand. And he built this wonderful stupa. And here you see a classical Thai and Burmese and Cambodian structure of Buddhist temple. So inside the gateway at the top of the stairs would have been a great statue of Buddha, now gone. And then you can see the stupa, upside down begging bowl at the top, now very badly dilapidated. It would have been painted with plaster and then gold on top of that. That's all gone now, of course. But this is a beautiful stupa. It's called Mong Kol, and the Buddhist people today represent the fact that their great hero, King Naresuan, built it after the victory over the Burmese by decorating all the Buddhist statues which surround the temple itself in these lovely saffron robes, which are changed every week religiously by the Buddhist priests. Ayutthaya at this time was one of the greatest cities in the world. It was the same size and wealth as Paris, which is hard for us to imagine that on the other side of the world, around about the 17th century, was this enormous city, great wealth, great trading nation, now respected by not only Southeast Asian countries, but also the European growing colonial powers. And this is a wonderful drawing, which was dated to around about 1660, which shows Ayutthaya surrounded by the rivers which moved on towards Bangkok. Of course, the colonial powers were constantly vying for expansion ever eastwards, and the king wanted to remain independent. In the 17th century, the only contact he had with the colonial powers was something that he could trade with, and those were guns and telescopes and clocks. And he exchanged money and luxury items, elephant wood, etc., ivory, for the manufactured goods of the Western European countries. And of course, France was trying to build its influence in Southeast Asia, and the king, Narai, thought that maybe France was the least onerous of the colonial powers, and so he allowed the French to have an ambassador. Abbé de Choisy was sent in 1685, and he wrote back letter after letter to the King of France saying, "My goodness, the king is absolutely revered. You may be revered in France, but this man is considered to be a god. You cannot touch him. You have to communicate using," he was passing up his letters to the king on a platter. Well, Ayutthaya was not to last forever, and the Burmese came back with a huge army, and after dominating Southeast Asia, Ayutthaya, Thailand, was to come to an end. There was a 14-month siege, and it was totally destroyed and never lived in again, and that was the end of the early Thai Empire. Today, the great work has been done to rebuild and reconstruct some of the wonderful religious buildings, and this is Wat Chai, built around 1630, and this is a night view, obviously, but it shows you the prang. The prangs at the center there are like corn cobs, and they represent Mount Meru, which we'll talk about, where the gods of India lived. So although it's a Buddhist country, they respect Indian gods, which is an interesting amalgam. This is one of my favorite pictures because when the Mongols swept through and destroyed many of the statues, this head of Buddha fell to the ground, but a peepal tree encapsulated it and rose it out of the ground. It's about 4 feet off the ground now, but it's now embedded in the tree, as you can see. And when the floods come, which is sadly too often, you can see that the floods so far have never gone beyond his chin. So he's up to his neck in water, but he's never yet been seen to be underwater. This is a tragic set of pictures I took in 2011, where most of Thailand was underwater. In July onwards, you can see the reclining Buddha is now underwater, and they're having to row past him. And then the aerial view there is really shocking. And of course, the damage that these floods do, it keeps on eating away to the foundations of these wonderful ancient 400-year-old temples, and they are steadily decaying and are tilting very badly. The floods of 2011 have not quite been reproduced. There was one in 2018-19. It's a constant issue for the Thai people, but this was the worst on record, as you can see. This is downtown Bangkok. 8 million people lost their homes temporarily at that time. And of course, the Thai people, the land of smiles, never seem to be put down. And these two kids, although they lost their homes and they couldn't walk anywhere without them in water, and there were snakes swimming by and turtles, they just couldn't help but pose for photographs. There were 100,000 people without homes in the capital, Bangkok. Thailand was about to change into the modern world, and the person who did it is the founder of the new dynasty, which is still running Thailand today. And there was a fight between a general and a gentleman called Thaksin and another general called Chakri, and Chakri won the day in 1776, which I know is a very important date for other reasons. I just can't remember why. In 1776, he became the king, and he took the name Rama. Rama is the great Hindu god related to Vishnu, and although they are Buddhist people, they still respect the Hindu gods, and that's why he took the name Rama the First. And so every king since 1780 has been called Rama. He realized that the threats from other countries was too great in the north. Ayutthaya and Sukhothai were too far north, so he moved all the way south to what is now known as the City of Angels, Krung Thep, which in English is translated into Bangkok. And he founded the Grand Palace. So there's nothing in Bangkok today which is older than 1780, so it's considered to be a relatively modern city. The most famous of the early Ramas was Rama IV, and he was the youngest son and was not going to be the king, but his brother died, and he was dragged out of the monastery where he'd become a Buddhist monk, where he'd been a monk for 27 years. And he was a different character from the previous kings in the sense that he had studied, he was educated, and he realized that if Thailand was to move forward to work on a par with the colonial powers growing in Europe and America, that they needed to have a modern system of education. And so he had 39 wives and 82 kids, and he decided that he needed somebody to help educate them. And he sent a messenger down to Singapore, and there Anna Leonowens, a single lady who was a governess, was invited to come and educate his kids. When they met, he wrote in his notes that she was a very difficult, opinionated lady, but let's give her a shot. He unfortunately got bitten by a mosquito while watching a lunar eclipse in 1868, and he died. His son, Rama V, shown here on the right, became one of the most famous of all the kings of Thailand, and his proper name was Chulalongkorn, but he's known as Rama V. And of course, he was educated and brought up by Anna Leonowens. And so he became fluent in English and he learnt about European matters and the United States. But she couldn't help herself, and after the few years that she was being the governess of him and his brothers and sisters, she went home, retired to London, and wrote a rather gossipy, unflattering book about her time as the king's governess. But he nevertheless forgave her, and Rama V sent letters to her. And when he came to London in 1897, he looked her up, and they are still friends. And she died in 1915. The problem with this story gets a lot worse when an American authoress, Margaret Landon, in 1944, took the work of Anna Leonowens and made it much spicier. And most of it is fiction, but it became a bestseller called Anna and the King, and of course led to theatre stage and also movies of the King of Siam, Anna and the King. And of course this racy, fictionalized story of Anna Leonowens upset the Thais, and to this day it's a banned book and movie in Thailand. Rama V was considered to be the greatest of the founding kings. He tried to reform the country along modern lines. He ended slavery in 1905. He stopped people bowing and scraping and touching their forehead on the floor to meet him. There were many people who felt he was moving too quickly towards the west, and his palace was burnt down by anti-reformists. And of course, the colonial powers saw an opportunity here for influence, and the French were the ones who were building up the Cochin Empire in Southeast Asia, and they sent a couple of gunboats to Bangkok in 1893, trying to impress the king that they should come under the French influence in Southeast Asia. The Brits were very against this, not that they liked Siam or Thailand particularly for themselves, but they wanted the French from getting it, so they wrote a paper where they would always defend Thailand against anybody encroaching on its territory. And apart from the Second World War for a short period, Thailand has never been under the thumb of a colonial power. But the king realized that the great days of Siam have gone, and he was a broken man. Cambodia fell to the French. The British stole a bit of northern Thailand, but France never quite managed to take Thailand, and so it stayed independent. And to this day, there are statues all over Thailand which recognize how Rama V brought the medieval Thailand into the modern day. The next two Ramas are rather weak, and the army stepped in 1932, and 49 army officers converted the monarchy into a constitutional monarchy, and it's been like that ever since. And really the history of Thailand after the Second World War is a constant back and to between democracy and army rule. Siam's name disappeared in the Second World War, and Thailand became its name as of today. As I mentioned, it was invaded by Japan, and the famous Bridge of the River Kwai movies in the 60s. This is the Bridge of the River Kwai, which was a Japanese railway moving to invade Burma. And of course, it wasn't actually constructed it was constructed over the River Kwai in Thailand, but for the movie, it was constructed in Sri Lanka. So when you see the movie the next time, just remember that this bridge is in fact in a valley in Sri Lanka, south of India. After the Second World War, it was considered that a new king was required, and Rama IX was appointed. He was 19 years of age, and that brings us up into modern times, because he was the king who held Thailand together over 40 tumultuous years. As I mentioned, there was constant back and toing between military rule, student risings, massacres by the military, and finally in 1980s, for 10 years, the military general Prem took control because the turmoil of the country was destroying it. And he was very clever at balancing the army with the king and some form of democracy. He allowed democratic elections to take place in 88, but they didn't work, and so he took over again in 1991. And the person who kept this whole ragbag of chaos under control was, of course, the king. He's the constancy which has kept Thailand in one piece. Of course, in 1997, like all of the Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia particularly badly hit. The financial crisis, the Asian tigers collapsed, and the IMF stepped in, and with them came a new constitution. Unfortunately, intervened then was the disaster which we in the West saw the day after Christmas in 2004, when a tsunami hit the island of Phuket on the west coast of Thailand, and many people sadly died, and many thousands of people are still missing. And I just warn you to watch out for the internet, because this is, if you type in the Phuket tsunami, this is what you'll see. It's completely manufactured. The actual height of the tsunami was never more than 20 feet. This looks like it's hundreds of feet high, but it was enough to devastate Phuket. The new chapter of Thai politics is dominated by this figure, Thaksin Shinawatra. There he is on the right. He had made a lot of money on communications, cell phones, and he was elected in 2001 as a man of the people. He came forward with some really creative, modern socialist ideas: free healthcare, rice subsidies for the poor, and his supporters were legion. The farmers and laborers came in behind him. He was a god. And he did one more step, which made him more popular, was he said Bangkok should not have all the money, just like people complain that London gets all the money that's being spent in England. He said, we're going to rebalance where the investment is in Bangkok towards the north. And this gave him great success with the northern farmers. He said, I'm going to break down this cronyism between the military elite and the king. And he really threatened and shook the tree of Thai history. Of course, the army couldn't live with this, and so in 2006 he was accused of corruption, and the army moved in, took over, and he left the country overnight. The army handed over power, as they had done many times in 2007, but that led to chaos. And the chaos was between those two shirted people, the red shirts and the yellow shirts. There were three prime ministers. They couldn't hold the government together, and the two sides were vehemently opposed. The yellow shirts, by the way, are royalists, pro-business, pro-army, as opposed to the red-shirted people, as I mentioned, were farmers and socialists. The yellow shirts were very distressed at the lack of progress. In 2008, they shut the airport down. And eventually, the country carried on swinging back and forward between military rule and democratic elections until the 2011 election, when this lady appeared and won a huge majority. Her name is Yingluck Shinawatra, and you'll remember that Shinawatra was the same family name as Thaksin. Yes, she is the sister of Thaksin, who is still in exile in Geneva. She's the first female prime minister, and she was hugely popular. But of course, the army could not live with a socialist pro-Thaksin regime, and so she was accused of corruption and being influenced by her brother out of the country, and they accused her of paying farmers far too much for rice just to get their vote. So they had her arrested, and she's still under house arrest in Thailand today. On the horizon is the aging king, but people were looking to who's going to take over from him when he eventually passes away. And the person who's the obvious choice was the Crown Prince Vajiralongkorn. Here is a picture on the right-hand side where he was a pilot for Thai Air, but very unpopular because he lived outside the country in Switzerland. He was very closely linked with Thaksin, and he had numerous girlfriends, and the most infamous one was Princess Siris Azmi, who was a lady-in-waiting of low birth, and they didn't even know he was married to her until she was pregnant in 2005, and then the country woke up to this picture on the right-hand side where there was the Crown Prince and some young lady with a fufu. And Fufu was promoted to Air Chief Marshal, a military position with a pension for life. Well, the country and the army didn't like this, and so in 2004, he was forced to divorce her. In 2014, to this present day, an ex-general runs Thailand. His name is Chan O-cha. He censored the press. There are no political parties, and he is very closely aligned to the royal family. The two of them coexist. And so anybody who criticizes the royal family is in danger. If you're a foreigner, you'll be lucky and marched out of the country and not allowed back again if you criticize the royal family or the military. And he has locked up 55,000 people for criticizing the royal family for 30-year sentences. It's a really serious matter. If you're a Thai and you say or write something against the royal family and it's picked up, then you are in grave danger. The royal family controls about $44 billion of assets, parts of banks, industries, hotels, lands, and so the royal family and the military are working hand in glove. And you can see that the military have their presence throughout the major cities in Thailand. In 2016, the military moved to tighten up their control of the democratic system, and they came up with the concept, this is the 17th constitution in 40 years. And they said that you don't have to be an elected member of parliament to actually be a PM, which meant that the army could nominate prime ministers willy-nilly. And they set up this pseudo-organization called the National Council for Peace and Order, NCPO, where this council, run by the army, had the authority to make appointments for the Senate. So really, democracy is challenged to this day in Thailand. Well, King Bhumipol, Rama IX, had held the country together for 70 years. Of course, he had pocketed some cash. He's worth about $30 billion. He's survived 18 coups and 16 constitutions, but he is the loved father of the country. And here he is on one of his anniversaries with his son ahead of him and his wife to the right. In 2016, the world woke up to what was expected, that King Bhumipol finally died. The question then was, who takes over? Crown Prince Vajiralongkorn, who is 63, or should we choose somebody else who perhaps isn't tainted with the scandals that he had when he was a younger man? And his sister was being nominated at one time to take over as prime minister. So the king worked with the army and said, the new crown prince to be king, I should say, said, why don't we just pause, not nominate me as king, just leave me as crown prince, and I will mourn my father for a year. A year later, October 2017, by then the dust will have settled. I'd either be accepted by the population or not, and then we, you and I, the army and I, can decide who's going to be the next king of Thailand. Of course, that year actually bought himself time, and the result was that he was nominated to be king, and he is king today. Coming up to modern times, 2019 saw an attempt by the Democratic Party to push the military government out, and they nominated a princess of the royal blood to stand for prime minister, who would then galvanize the anti-army party, the socialists, who are aligned with the Thaksin family, and sweep the military out of power. No sooner had this been nominated publicly in February than the army said, and supported by the king, he went public and said, to involve a member of the royal family in politics is against royal traditions, and she was stood down. Surprise, surprise, in June 2019, the army, in the form of Chan O-cha, was reconfirmed as the prime minister. He won 2/3 of the vote, allegedly. That brings me to the end of the first part of the history of Thailand. The second part, which you'll see next week, we'll talk more about the people, the culture, and the geography and the sights to be seen if you go and visit Thailand. So until then, take care.